Are you just riding on your parents' success at work and being lazy now? And you don't even have kids. Why did you leave my child alone? How did someone like you even manage to get married? What tricks did you use? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law never liked me. They always threw snide comments and spread false rumors. I'm Karen Williams, 35, married to John, who's turning 37 for 7 years. Since my dad passed away 6 years ago, we've been living with my mom. John is kind, and we get along well. Despite a peaceful home, my career has had its ups and downs, causing me stress. After college, I initially worked at my dad's company, but it wasn't the right fit. In the first year of marriage, I switched jobs, and it was a tough decision then, but I'm glad I made the change. I have 2 brothers who stuck with our father's company. Given my family background, it seemed natural for me to join eventually. The company specialized in electrical engineering, so I pursued and completed my degree in that field before joining my father's business. Since my whole family worked there, I never doubted that was my future. When I started, there were rumors that I got the job because of my father, which hurt. Colleagues distanced themselves when they knew I was the CEO's daughter. No matter how hard I worked, it was seen as riding on my parents' coattails, frustratingly similar to what my brothers faced. I worked hard to prove them wrong, climbing the ladder of success. My boss, despite being the CEO's daughter, was strict, ensuring my promotions were due to my efforts. However, achievements were tainted with accusations of favoritism, which got me down. After 3 years, I met my husband at work, disliked by female staff due to his competence, personality, and substantial income. We had met before at bookstores and libraries, chatting occasionally. It was a surprise when we ended up working together. Our shared love for reading quickly blossomed into a relationship, causing jealousy and gossip among my coworkers. During our time together, I met my husband's family, but my mother-in-law and sister-in-law disliked me. They'd make snide remarks about my supposed easy life and job privileges due to my father. They believed I coasted through life on my parents' success, enjoying a high salary because of them. However, my father, despite being kind-hearted, is strict at work and doesn't mix personal matters with business. He doesn't play favorites just because I'm his child. If I didn't have the skills, he wouldn't have hired me. I respect my father's judgment, and it frustrates me when others belittle it unreasonably. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, especially the latter, criticize me for supposedly riding on coattails and resent my close relationship with my husband. They question how someone like me got married, implying I used tricks. My sister-in-law, dressed impeccably in high-end fashion, turns heads, but her sharp personality leads to short-lived romances. I later learned she confessed her feelings to my brother in college, but was turned down. During a family gathering, they recognized each other, and my brother shared this story with me. As his sister, I know he's earnest, hardworking, and considerate, with a flair for fashion that makes him popular with the ladies. My sister-in-law's frustration from being rejected seemed to make her harsher towards me. So, I decided to maintain some distance, especially when it was just my mother-in-law and sister-in-law around. Whenever I visited my in-laws and had tea, it tasted strange, as if something had been added intentionally. It wasn't obvious, but it seemed like my mother-in-law was serving unpleasant food to harass me. Initially, I thought it might be my imagination, but when she smirked and ridiculed me for not appreciating the taste, I realized it was deliberate. Both of them were always sour or mean, even when I tried to be friendly in front of others. I learned to navigate around them to avoid their snide remarks. When it came to the food at my in-laws, I politely ate as little as possible to avoid being rude. If you ask whether I lived happily after marrying my husband, I'd say not quite. Despite a good relationship with my husband, marriage brought more gossip at work. The workplace gossip got worse than when we were dating, and the ongoing harassment and sarcasm from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law gradually drained my spirit. While I found my work rewarding, the toxic environment made me question if this was okay. Contemplating my future more and more, my father's passing, and my brother becoming the CEO led to gossip about me being the CEO's sister. Already shocked by my father's death, my spirit was completely broken. I felt I could no longer work at the company, even though I had always imagined working there. Years of gossip and sarcastic comments had eroded my self-esteem, and I found myself crying easily without understanding the source of my sadness. I was truly at a loss. Seeing me in such a state, my mother and husband were genuinely concerned and took excellent care of me. With their support, I slowly began to recover and discussed my future with my mother. I had been considering trying a different job, but I felt like I lacked any special skills. Depressed, I voiced my concerns to my mother, asking if there was anything I could do. To my surprise, my mother said, "Karen, you've always loved reading and writing stories, haven't you? I think you'd be suited for a job that involves writing." Her words jogged my memory. It was true. I've always been an avid reader, excelled in liberal arts subjects, and enjoyed writing novels and poems. Encouraged by my mother, I started contemplating a career in writing. Upon reflection, I realized that a career in electrical engineering wasn't right for me. My mother had always advised me to choose a job I loved since my student days, but I didn't see it then. It seemed my mother understood me better than I understood myself. So, I decided to make a fresh start and aim to become a novelist, starting my career in writing. Being a beginner was tough, and I was using up my savings every day. I faced my computer continuously, writing. Initially fueled by the desire to prove others wrong, I now worked hard for myself, finding it more enjoyable despite the challenges. I dedicated most of my day to crafting stories, and by the second year, I was earning about as much as an average office worker. In the fourth year, one of my novels won an award and got published, allowing me to sign a contract with a publishing house, ensuring a stable flow of work. By the fifth year, thanks to a hit novel, I was earning more than my husband. My novels were even adapted into comics and dramas, ensuring a steady income. The journey was tough, but working as a novelist made me realize that my previous jobs weren't the right fit for me. However, my success wouldn't have been possible without the support of my mother and husband. As for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, they doubted my success when they heard I became a novelist, making snide remarks about leeching off my husband. After my father-in-law passed, their comments worsened. Working mostly from home, they called me a nerd due to our high-rise luxury condo, assuming my husband covered all expenses. They believed I didn't contribute financially, despite explaining that the condo was my inheritance, and I split living costs with my husband. They continued their comments behind his back, adding stress to the situation. They'd also made rude remarks about me not having children, which started at 30 and has become increasingly tiresome as I approached 35 without any expectations. I faced discomfort from two individuals despite repeatedly explaining work matters to them. Seeking advice from my mother and husband, I decided to address the situation early on, learning from past experiences. Apart from my mother, as the two were part of my husband's family and behaved decently in front of him, I conveyed things to him in the gentlest terms possible. I told him he didn't have to deal with those two, and I would handle meetings or communications with them. Understanding my emotional struggles during the backbiting period, he tried to minimize my interactions with them out of concern. Thanks to his support, the instances of being subjected to their snide remarks lessened, though there were still moments when their malice affected me. Knowing I had allies in my mother and husband helped me quickly bounce back. Regarding the issue of not having children, my mother, who had me at an older age, assured me there was no rush. She shared that I had been born later in her life, so there was no need to worry. I decided not to stress about it too much and wait patiently. Considering my workload, the negativity from those two, and the feeling of being rushed, I thought it wouldn't be the right time to have children. Despite occasional snide remarks from the two, my mental state was more stable than when I worked at the company. Living peacefully in the well-designed and well-located house my father left us, I enjoyed a happy life with my mother and husband. The shared facilities, including gym equipment and workspace, allowed me to exercise and take breaks during work, making everything run smoothly. However, one day my mother, who had been energetically working, suddenly collapsed and passed away from a stroke. She had gone to work as usual that day, seemingly healthy with no chronic illnesses. I sent her off with a smile in the morning, never expecting this turn of events. Stunned, I rushed to the hospital, but she had already passed away. Seeing her, looking as if she had just fallen asleep, disbelief washed over me. As I arranged for her funeral, my feelings finally settled down, and I quietly cried, unable to believe she was gone so suddenly. My husband, aware of how lively my mother was in the morning, also cried in disbelief. With a close and long relationship with her, he mourned her loss as well. Amidst our sadness, we prepared for the wake and funeral, managing the reception as acquaintances came by to mourn. Witnessing the outpouring of love for my mother was consoling. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, acting somber in my husband's presence, approached me when he was busy with others. Insensitively, they whispered, "With your mother gone, it's going to be tough. And since we're family, no need for condolence money, right? I won't give a dime to a gold digger like you." Their lack of compassion shocked me, but before I could respond, my husband intervened, and they quickly pretended to be sad and left. Despite their audacity, I chose to focus on mourning my mother rather than dwelling on their rudeness. Back home after the funeral, grief overwhelmed me, and I felt listless. Memories of my mother flooded back, making the sense of loss unbearable. Despite the busy funeral preparations, the sorrow intensified once I returned home. The vibrant image of my mother made the grief even more poignant, and I found myself crying again. While deep in grief, a rational part of my mind knew I couldn't afford to stay this way. With a deadline looming, I had manuscripts to write, and the understanding of the publishing house had its limits. In honor of my mother's support for my career, I resolved to calm my grief and get back to normal. Amid this resolve, a call from the front desk informed me of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's unexpected visit. Uncertain of their intentions, I reluctantly decided to meet them, hoping for a distraction. As we went downstairs to greet them, puzzled by their sudden appearance, they announced, "We're going to be living in your house from today, so show us around, please. And since this is our home now, you, a stranger, need to leave right away." Stunned, we couldn't comprehend their words. Instead of discussing the matter elsewhere, they demanded a tour of the house immediately. Perplexed, my husband suggested heading to a nearby store for a discussion. However, they insisted on being shown around the house, causing a commotion that drew the attention of other residents. To avoid causing a scene, my husband persuaded them to go to a nearby diner. Over drinks, we listened to their absurd story, and the sheer ridiculousness of it all made my earlier sorrow momentarily vanish. They believed the high-rise condo belonged to my husband, and insisted that, since my mother had passed away, we should all live together. My husband was bewildered by their absurd claims, seemingly growing angry, but he calmly began clearing up their misunderstanding. First off, that condo is Karen's, inherited from her father, not mine. And Karen's not unemployed. She has a job. I explained that I was the owner of the condo, which was part of my father's legacy, and that I was working as a best-selling novelist. However, they wouldn't accept it. A novelist? That's hardly a stable income. There's no need to defend her just because she's your wife, right? Defending her like that? Are you brainwashed or something? You'd better divorce her quickly. I even mentioned my popular works, but they dismissed it as a lie. What kind of upbringing allows someone to speak like that? Didn't your mother teach you anything? You'd be better off not telling such lies. Ridiculed about my mother and my work, I was getting steamed. I had been patient, but it was time to speak up. Just as I was about to open my mouth, my husband, who'd been explaining to the two unlistening people, lost his cool and burst out in anger. "Enough already. Stop talking nonsense. Don't you ever mock Karen." The two were taken aback by my husband's rare show of fury. "We've explained it time and again. How many times do I need to say it for you to get it? Karen isn't half-heartedly pursuing her writing career. With my husband's outburst, it seemed they finally began to realize that everything we had been explaining was the truth, and confusion set in. Okay, I get it. We're sorry. Let's live together then. I've already told my friends I'm moving into the high-rise condo. It's going to be embarrassing if I don't, so let us move in. Still, without sincere regret or a sorry attitude about wanting to live with us, their approach didn't change. My husband, growing even angrier, declared, "There's no way we're living with you two. Just go back home." His rejection of them was even stronger. Panicked by his words, they began pleading with my husband to let them stay. "We're in a bind here. We've already sold our family home and have nowhere to live." "What? What do you mean?" It turned out they had sold their house without telling us, assuming they could move into ours. They were already arranging to move and hadn't even looked for another place, starting to make wild claims out of desperation. "So it's okay for you if your family left high and dry. Just let us stay with you." I quit my job thinking I was going to live in the condo. Their faces turned pale as they desperately implored my husband to let them stay in our house. My sister-in-law quit her job, it seems, and after constantly mocking me for being a nerd. It's pretty clear she was fully intent on leeching off my husband herself. And it's just plain rude, family or not, to show up unannounced like that. From the barrage of complaints to my husband, it was obvious they pegged me as the villain, imagining themselves as the hero saving my husband from me. That's why they thought it'd be a great idea to show up out of the blue, convinced my husband to kick me out, and then move in together, thinking he'd be thrilled about it. "We'll take care of everything at home, so it's all good, right? We'd like to get a little something for doing the chores if that's okay." They claimed they'd do the housework, but also had the nerve to ask for an allowance. I was utterly taken aback by their shameless attitude. I was angry at them, sure, but more than that, I began to think getting mad at them was just a waste of energy. My husband started getting even angrier with their audacious behavior. "If you're going to sell the family home, why wouldn't you say a word to me about it? It's your doing, so if there's no house, that's not my problem." He flat out refused. When they realized that they couldn't persuade him, they had the gall to ask me to do it. "Hey Karen, could you please talk John into letting us stay? We won't tell you to leave, and it's fine if you live with us. If things stay as they are, we're out of options. Please convince him." After all the ridicule toward me, what arrogance they had. It's my house and my name, yet they act so high and mighty. I've always detested the idea, but if I ever lived with them, I'd surely be tormented. Before I could sarcastically refuse, my husband burst out again, exploding with anger. "Enough is enough. After all the crap you've given Karen, you've got some nerve. Just stop asking for a share of the home sale money and go back where you came from. I don't even want to see you two anymore." And with that, he made an outright declaration of disownment. Despite their persistent attempts to cling to my husband, we ignored them, settled the bill, and promptly left the restaurant. They still shamelessly showed up at our upscale condo from time to time, unrepentant. After I explained the situation to the building manager, they warned those two, knowing that if they kept making a racket, the cops would be called and sent them away. But they still showed up, lurking around the front door, badgering my husband to let them move in or to give them financial help. When my husband finally got fed up and threatened to call the police, they stopped coming around. Looks like he was serious about cutting ties. He even went through with the legal steps to disown them. But then they started sending our phones plenty of messages, emails, begging to live with us, and asking for money kept flooding in. I got so fed up with the constant harassment that I immediately blocked their numbers. Turns out their family home was too old and inconveniently located to sell for much, and they were counting on my husband without any savings of their own. So they ended up selling what they could and moved into a cheap, run-down apartment. Finding a job was tough, so they're scraping by with multiple part-time gigs, living a busy life. As for me, well, the good news of a pregnancy came through once the relentless messages stopped. I had been worried about not being able to have kids, so this was a real joy. With this happy news of pregnancy, I finally felt a glimmer of hope after a long time. I'm determined to be the kind of mother my child can always feel safe with, just like my mother. And while looking forward to the arrival of my baby, I continue to dedicate myself to my work.